Hi, my name is Jeffrey Lessel, and I'm a developer on the People application for Planning Center. And in this video tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to use the public API to create your own applications. At Planning Center, we take pride in our API. In fact, we use our API for our own features a lot of the times, and more as the years go by. So we make it pretty full-featured, we make it pretty well documented, and I'm going to show you how to create an application using it today. The thing we're going to be creating is this very bare looking form. I'm hoping that a designer can come through on your end and make this look pretty for your church. But this is basically a pre-registration form. We have a lot of requests from churches that would like for families to pre-register before they visit on a Sunday, so that once they get to the church, they'll have all the information already in the system, including their household information, their names, their genders, whether they're adult or a child. So we're going to create that using the API for our own church. Let me show you how it's going to work. Let's say my name is John Doe. I am a male and I'm an adult. I can add another person. This will be Kelly Doe, and she's a female, also an adult. And let's say we have a Jane Doe as our child. Then I can submit that form, and it comes up with a thanks, see you at church. And of course, all this can be customized. But that's the basics of what we're going to build, so let's get started. We're going to be building our application out of two main technologies. The first is React. We're going to be building the front end out of React that handles the user interactions. And when you submit the form, that'll be submitted to a separate application that we're going to be building that is built out of Ruby on Sinatra. Now, the reason we're doing a separate backend and front end is we could make the form submit directly to Planning Center through the API via the JavaScript. But when you have to authenticate the API request, you're going to be using your secret token and your secret. And those need to be kept secrets. So whenever you submit that form via JavaScript, those things would not be secrets because you could view those, anyone could view those in the developer tools and the network request tab. So we're going to be keeping that on the back end and let our backend server handle those requests for us. But whenever I get started an application like this on the front end, I like to use createapp.dev. It's not something I came up with. It's out there for you to use. But it basically makes configuring an application like this pretty simple. So in this case, I'm going to use Parcel. I think it's a little more minimal than Webpack, and we don't need a lot of the things that Webpack would provide over Parcel. We're going to be using React as our main library and Babel as our transpiler. For styling, we're just going to go straight CSS, even though it's going to look pretty ugly. And then for linting, these are personal choices, but I like to use both of these things. So we can download that. I'm going to save that. Okay, now in the terminal, I'm going to go to a directory that I use for development. In this case, I have a development directory personally. I'm going to make a directory called pre-register, and that'll hold both of our applications. And then inside pre-register, I also want to make a JavaScript directory. Remember, we're going to have a JavaScript and a Ruby directory. So in this case, I'm just going to say JS. I'm going to go into the JS directory, and then I'm going to copy my downloads empty project zip file to here. And then I'm just going to unzip that inside my directory. Now you can see that all our files are created here. So we got a README, a BabelRC, our source files, and some initial package stuff. So in this case, I like to use Yarn. So I'm going to yarn install and then install all the requisites in the package. Now that that's done, we can start up the web server and see what we've got. So it provides a start script. So we'll say yarn start. Parcel will start up, and the server is running at localhost with the 1234 port. In this case, I'm just going to click on that and see what we have. So we have Hello Jane. Awesome. Let me zoom in a little bit here. All right, so Hello Jane is what we've got here. Now that we know that the server is running, let's go ahead and open up the index file to see what exactly it's generated for us. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my Emacs editor, which is what I use. Go into the source directory here, and then take a look at the index.html. Now here we can see it's just got some basic boilerplate, but it's including the script here for index.js. So let's take a look at that. Let's go into index.js, and here we can see the React that it generated. In this case, it's just rendering this div, hello, with the props name, just to show you that you could do props. And of course, we have the name equals Jane, and so that's why it says hello Jane. Now, we obviously want to change this into building our own form. Now, we could build our form in this app component itself, but I like to keep things a little bit more separate. So in this case, let's create a new file called form.js. And we're going to import React from React, so we can use React. And we don't need the React DOM. In this case, let's just go ahead and make a function component. So we're going to do const form equals, in this case, we're not going to have anything in there yet. And let's just make sure that everything's hooked up correctly by saying React. And that will be our thing. We also need to export it. So export form, export default form. Now over on the index file, let me make this a little bit bigger. Now over on the index file, we need to import that form and then render it. So let's import form from form. And instead of rendering this div here, let's change all that. Instead, just render the form. Now we don't need the props anymore, so let's save that. One of the nice things about Parcel is it automatically detects changes in your code and reloads the web browser for you. So you can see that I didn't even press refresh on my browser and React is already here. In this case, if you look at our server, it doesn't really provide any details about the fact that it did that, but it did. Just to demonstrate, let's have this in the background and we can change what we're rendering here. So instead of React, let's say React Fast and save that. And we can see that it re-rendered itself over here. So that's very helpful during this development process. Make this full screen again. One thing I do want to do is make sure that Prettier is enabled in my buffer here. So I'm going to turn on Prettier mode. This is just an Emacs thing. You don't really need to do this if you don't have Emacs. So I'm going to turn Prettier mode on and save that again. And you can see it automatically pretties it up for us based on the rules we have. So let's go a little further. So in this case, we want to build a form. And on that form, we want to collect information like first name, last name, how about their age, maybe not their age, but their gender and their grade, if they have any. And that'll allow us to, once we get to the church, allow us to check in the person based on what grade and maybe even gender they have. So let's do that. The first thing we want to do is render a form with the first name field. So let's do the first name field. Let me just make this a little prettier here. I'm going to add in not all those, but one of these parentheses. The nice thing about Prettier is as soon as I save here, you'll see that it'll make everything very nice. So in this case, we want to input type equals text, and it'll be our first name input. So in this case, I'm just going to make a placeholder of Jane Doe. I'm going to save that and just see what that looks like. And here is our input with our placeholder of Jane Doe. Now in this case, we want to be able to accept multiple people, and we want kind of a label and everything. So let's add a label here, HTML4, and we're going to have to change our input to do this as well. So let's make this for first name, and make the label first name. In the input, we're going to need to pick an ID of first name. Then we can close out our label. So all that be wrapped in a label tag. So we go back, we have our first name. If we click on first name, it'll automatically take us into the input for first name. Now in this case, I don't really like the fact that first name is on the same line as our input. So I'm going to just add this in a little div. There we go. Now I will note this may not be the best way to do things, but we're just doing something quick and dirty so you can show you how you can use the API. So a lot of this stuff is just, let's just get to it. Feel free to modify any of this to make it look pretty or conform to your specific requirements or preferences, but we're going to keep moving. So we have our first name. I'm just going to copy all this and make a whole nother label. In fact, let's just wrap this in their own div. So that's a div. Then we need to add another div for our last name. And I'm going to highlight all this and actually do a little like a search and replace. So within there, I'm going to change first name to last name. And then also change this to last name. So now, save that. It's going to pretty it up for us. So now we should have two fields. We got our first name and we got our last name. Of course, I just realized her first name is not going to be Jane Doe. Let's Jane, and then our last name will be Doe. There we go. That's a little more like it. Again, click on the labels. It'll highlight the inputs for us. Okay, the next thing we want is a gender field. In this case, we're going to make it a drop down so that they don't have to provide a gender if they don't want to. So we'll have a blank, a male, and a female. In this case, we're going to make it a select. Select, and I'm not going to do anything other than the select for now, just so we can show you how we're going to build that out. So the first option is going to be blank. So just a blank option here. The next option is going to be male. So the value is going to be capital M. Put male, close out that option. Next option is going to be female. Well, if I could type there, female. And then we're going to close out that select. Whoop, got to close that out fully. And then close out the div. So let's see what that looks like. We do have our drop down. We don't have the label though. I forgot the label. So let's do a label here. Label HTML4 equals gender, and our select ID will be gender. So we match that and then close out our label down here after our select is done. I forgot to put the actual label in. So gender. There we go. Now we have our gender selector. Now the problem is, when we change all these things, we don't really know the what's in there, and we'll be adding that logic a little bit later. So don't worry about that quite yet. We're just going to try to build out the form. And finally, the last thing we want is a how about a child, adult child radio. So we'll go div, and then the label is going to be HTML4 equals how about adult? No, let's do child. Child. And then let's make it a radio. So put type equals radio. Name equals child. ID also equals child. And the value here is going to be false because we're going to have adult first. So this will be adult. Adult. And then we're also going to have an input. Type equals radio, name equals child, and ID equals child. And that equals true. And for this one, we'll make sure that we put in child and close out the label, and then close out the div, and make it pretty. So here we have adult or child. I forgot to do the label here. In this case, we want to, instead of doing the ID child here, we'd like to put it on the inputs themselves. So let's say HTML, so no label there. Take that in. We'll make the label here. So label HTML4 equals child. Let's say adult actually on this one. And put those in there. And then for the next one, label HTML4 equals child. And close out that label. And we forgot to change this ID to adult. All right, now if we click on the labels themselves, it selects the radio, which is nice. In this case, let's change that to child, question mark. Makes it a little more obvious that we're asking the question here. We also want to make sure that one of those is selected by default because Planning Center expects either true or false in this case. Although if you don't supply anything, it'll just assume it's an adult. But we do want to make this selected. But we're going to do that in a little bit. So that's the basics of our form. In the next step, we're going to actually make it to where it remembers the details of our form as we type it. And of course, we're going to use React hooks for that to store that into a state. So stay tuned for that.